Brain development. There are over 100 billion neurons in your brain.
It's the same number as there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So if you think about that in your head, equals the number of stars in the galaxy. And each neuron connects to about 10,000 other neurons. So that's where you get this big network. So that makes quadrillion connections, which is about the same number of cells you have in your body. So it's going to give you a sense of scale. So that's this part right here. And so the question it poses is, how does such a complex network develop? And so this first one says, well, it all starts when you're about 4 weeks old. And it shows this little dot, and pointing at it is you. And then over here, this is kind of a cartoon of a narrow groove begins to form on your nascent group of cells, giving the first hint of the nervous system. So again, this is at 4 days after conception. The groove then folds into itself, forming what's called the neural tube right there. And this is why it's so important that women take folic acid, because it's within the neural tube that you can have problems, and this is already happening within the 4th day after conception. And the tube then squeezes in various sections to form different parts of the brain and the spinal cord. So there's those are the 3 different sections right there: the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. And then inside there, that little tube, is new neurons are made in an area deep inside the growing brain called the ventricle zone. And then they travel outward, so they start in the middle, and then they go out by climbing along cellular ropes called Bergman glia. And we'll talk about glia in a little bit as well. The glia are kind of like the helper cells of the brain. And there's a lot more of them than there are neurons. And the neurons eventually settle into 6 distinct layers of neurons that make the brain cortex. So there's the different layers that it's showing there. Once in place, so back over here, to this picture right here, neurons reach to each other by extending tentacle-like growth clones, which are guided by chemical cues that lure and repel them towards receptors of other neurons. So this kind of goes to show that what the connections are made is very much related to the chemistry in the brain as well. It's not even just the neurons themselves. And it says, and the narration continues, but it's not all genetic. Neuron connections are also determined by activity patterns, which is what makes each brain so unique. So synchronized activation of 2 neurons reinforces their connection. And this is true, the synchronization, kind of reinforcing, is true throughout life. So it's true early on in prenatal development, but also much later on when we're talking about plasticity in older adults. It's when you have those kind of neurons firing together, then they kind of get stronger and more connected. And so lack of usage discourages connection. So if there's a connection there, but it's not being used, then it kind of will atrophy off. It disappears. And so it says that's why alcohol is so harmful to developing brains. It not only disrupts the genes involved in the development, so we're right here, but also affects the chemicals that transmit signals between the neurons. Okay, so they may grow the actual connections, but they're not actually getting connected, and so then they atrophy away. Okay, and so then here starts to get a little bit more humorous, but some of it's based on actual findings that we'll talk about. So even after birth, our brains are still in the process of wiring themselves and can be influenced by the world around us. So it shows the little baby and a picture of the dad, and a little milk bottle and a light. For example, cats raised in an environment of vertical stripes, so here's a cat in vertical stripes. This is one of the classic studies in psychology. Later have trouble seeing horizontal stripes. So if they only see vertical stripes, they have trouble seeing horizontal stripes. But here's the humor. There's the mouse walking around with horizontal stripes. I'm still trying to figure out the cat. Also, different parts of the brain develop at different rates. So for example, the frontal lobes, right here, the frontal lobes where judgment and decision making happens are still in development during our teenage years. And so it's kind of showing here the teenage brain, stuff, whatever, sex. The rational side isn't quite. The neuron itself, again, is the powerhouse of the brain. And there's the three parts, and I know this is going to be a review for many of you if you've taken any sort of biology, but for those of you that it's not review, I want to make sure that you understand. So this main cell body is kind of right here, and that's, again, kind of similar to other cells in that it has a nucleus and all those other pieces. But it also has these dendrites right here, where it gets information from other neurons around it. So here it's getting information from that neuron over there into this dendrite right there. But it's not just connected to one, as is simplified in this diagram, but many other ones. Remember, it said like 10,000. And so basically, the dendrites receive the information from the other cells. Okay, and then the axon, once it gets the information from the other cells, it kind of compiles it together and chemically will share the message down the axon to another set of cells where it's connected to. So it kind of follows that long chain, kind of from input from other cells into the cell body and then out the axon to pass the message along to others. So this connection between kind of one axon to other dendrites is called the synapse. That should be very similar. So that's why this right here is, that's the synapse where those two are connected. You see that they're not directly connected. And that's because this link between the axon and the dendrites is not a direct connection. It's actually chemically, you might have heard of neurotransmitters. It's actually neurotransmitters that are passed from one axon to the other. They're not like physically directly connected. It's actually through that, that chemical connection that it passes the message along. Okay. And another key thing that already came up in the wrap was the myelin sheathing. So that's what this is showing right here. The little tube of around there are the myelin sheathing. And basically, those are glia cells, and they there's actually 10, one of many kinds of glia cells. There's actually many different kinds, are glia. But basically, there's 10 times as many of the glia cells than there are neurons in the brain. So if you think about how many neurons we talked about each brain having, there's tons of those. And there's various versions and various support functions. And so these myelin sheath is one of, another set of glia cells. That, again, by having those on the neurons, it's going to pass the message along a lot quicker and leads to much speedier thinking processes later on in childhood than earlier on. Okay, so that's kind of the small pieces